I lay gasping on the freezing office floor, feeling the air drain from my lungs, using my last ounce of strength to call the two people who gave me life, not once, but 17 times. The only answer to my dying struggle was the lifeless beep of a voicemail. I thought my heart stopping was the ultimate betrayal. I was wrong. The true, cold-blooded betrayal was waiting patiently for me in the hospital recovery room. Hello to all our wonderful listeners here on Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team and continue bringing these stories to life for you. You can easily help by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link down in the description or the pinned comment. My name is Genevieve Harvey. I am 27 years old. It was supposed to be a triumph. I was sitting alone in the sprawling, glass-walled headquarters of Nexus Pulse Dynamics, right in the heart of downtown Chicago. As a lead coordinator for a medical technology firm, I was prepping the final slide deck for our biggest product launch of the year. The building was completely empty. The hum of the servers, the only company I had at 11 o'clock at night. I was starving. I had ordered a simple kale and quinoa salad from a new bistro downstairs. I took 3 bites. Just 3. I did not know the dressing contained a hidden peanut oil extract. Within seconds, my body knew. Anaphylaxis does not creep up on you. It crashes into you like a freight train. My lips began to tingle, then burn. The inside of my mouth felt like it was coated in thick, hot wax. I stood up, knocking my ergonomic chair backward. My hands trembled as I clawed at my purse, dumping its contents onto the sleek mahogany desk. Lipstick, keys, loose change, and finally, my lifeline. The bright yellow and blue casing of my EpiPen. I gripped it, ripped off the blue safety cap, and slammed the orange tip against my outer thigh. Nothing happened. No sharp pinch of the needle, no rush of life-saving epinephrine. I pushed harder, bruising my own leg, screaming internally. The internal spring was jammed, a manufacturing defect, a 1 in a million chance, and it was happening to me right now. My airway was shrinking, the tissues in my throat swelling shut. Every breath sounded like a broken, high-pitched whistle. My vision blurred at the edges, tunneling into a panicked gray. I grabbed my phone. I only needed someone to answer. I dialed the 2 people who were supposed to protect me unconditionally. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Harvey. They were renowned philanthropists, pillars of the Chicago elite. Tonight, they were attending a high-profile fundraising gala at a luxury hotel exactly 3 blocks away from my office. Just 3 blocks. They could walk here in 5 minutes. I hit dial on my mother's number. It rang 4 times before the automated voice kicked in. I hung up. I dialed my father. Voicemail. I dialed again and again. 17 times. I made 17 desperate phone calls. With every transfer to voicemail, another fragment of my hope shattered. I managed to hit record on the 3rd try. "Mom!" I wheezed into the receiver, my voice a wet, ragged gasp. "Please, cannot breathe. EpiPen broke. Help me." By the 10th call, I could not form words. I just left messages filled with wet, choking sounds and my own terrified sobbing. The air was gone. My lungs burned with a fiery, agonizing emptiness. The sleek office dissolved around me as my knees buckled. I hit the cold stone floor hard. Violent spasms racked my body as my brain starved for oxygen. I threw up violently, choking on my own sickness. I was thrashing against the unyielding stone, dying completely alone while my parents were sipping champagne 3 streets over. The gray tunnel in my vision collapsed into total blackness. My thrashing stopped. My heart gave one final, erratic stutter before falling completely still. But just as my consciousness slipped away into the void, a flashlight beam swept across the frosted glass doors of the suite. A night security guard on his routine patrol spotted my crumpled body. I did not hear the shatter of the thick security glass as he smashed his way in. I did not hear him frantically shouting into his radio, dialing 911. I was already gone. People talk about a comforting white light. They talk about a warm, inviting tunnel, or the gentle voices of angels guiding them to the other side. I experienced absolutely none of that. Death was not a peaceful transition. It was a terrifying, endless freefall into an absolute, freezing void. I was entirely untethered, stripped of my senses, plunging deeper and deeper into a suffocating darkness. The only connection I had left to the world of the living was a bizarre, distorted wailing sound, like an ambulance siren trying to pierce through miles of heavy ocean water. Reality did not return smoothly. It crashed back into my consciousness in violent, fragmented flashes of blinding agony, the harsh, clinical glare of fluorescent lights passing over me in the back of a moving vehicle, the loud sound of my silk blouse being torn open by frantic hands. The paramedics were fighting a desperate, losing war over my motionless chest. I would learn later the terrifying details of those missing moments. They had to drive a massive needle straight into my thigh, pumping heavy doses of raw adrenaline directly into my failing system. When that did not work, they charged the defibrillator paddles. My heart had completely flatlined. I was clinically dead for exactly 2.5 minutes. For 150 seconds, I simply ceased to exist. The next time I managed to force my heavy eyelids open, the surreal, freezing void had been replaced by the stark, sterile reality of the intensive care unit. The physical pain was entirely indescribable. Every single muscle in my body felt as though it had been fed through an industrial rock crusher and pieced back together wrong. A thick, rigid plastic tube was shoved aggressively down my swollen throat, forcing oxygen into my battered lungs with a mechanical, rhythmic hiss. I tried to lift my hands to pull the foreign object from my airway, but I could not move. My arms were weighed down by a chaotic web of intravenous lines and tightly strapped to the metal bed rails. My mind was wrapped in a thick, heavy narcotic fog. Yet, despite the intense confusion and the sheer physical agony, the most primal, childlike instinct cut right through the chemical haze. I needed my parents. I rolled my incredibly heavy head to the right, fully expecting to see my mother weeping into her expensive designer handkerchief, and my father pacing the length of the room, loudly demanding the very best specialists in the city. The leather visitor chair in the corner was completely empty. The entire room was empty, save for a young nurse in blue scrubs charting my vitals on a glowing monitor. I made a weak, wet, choking sound around the thick breathing tube. The nurse jumped, her eyes widening in surprise as she rushed over to my bedside. She had a kind, youthful face, but her eyes nervously darted away from mine the second she got close. She checked my leather restraints, adjusted a saline drip, checked the catheter, doing absolutely everything she could to avoid meeting my desperate gaze. I tapped my fingers frantically against the cold metal bed rail, mouthing the words around the plastic obstruction as best as I could. "Where are my parents?" She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing, her hand lingering on the metal intravenous pole just a second too long. "You just focus on breathing. Genevieve," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "You have been through a massive medical trauma. I will go get the attending physician." She did not wait for my response. She practically fled the room, leaving me alone with the rhythmic, mocking hiss of the life support machine. The silence that followed her departure was suffocating in a brand new, psychological way. Exactly 10 minutes later, the heavy wooden door pushed open. The chief of the intensive care department walked in. He was an older, imposing man with deep lines etched around his eyes, carrying a thick manila medical file. He did not possess the comforting, warm bedside manner I desperately craved in that moment. His expression was incredibly grim, tightly controlled, masking an emotion I could not quite place. It looked dangerously close to suppressed anger. He ordered a respiratory therapist to gently remove the breathing tube. It was a horribly uncomfortable, gagging process that left my throat feeling like torn, raw meat. Afterward, he offered me a tiny paper cup of ice chips. "You are an incredibly lucky young woman," he said softly, checking my pupil response with a small penlight. "Your heart stopped beating for 2.5 minutes. The anaphylactic shock you experienced was one of the most severe, aggressive cases our trauma team has seen this entire year. I managed a raspy, agonizing whisper, the words scraping violently against my ruined vocal cords. My mom, my dad, did you call them? The doctor slowly closed my medical file. He looked down at his scuffed leather shoes for a long moment, then back up at me, his jaw tightening visibly. Yes, we reached them. I waited for the explanation. I waited for him to say they were stuck behind a terrible traffic accident, that they were downstairs in the main lobby furiously filling out admission paperwork, that they were absolutely frantic with worry and pleading to be let inside. We contacted your parents exactly 4 hours ago, right after we finally managed to stabilize your pulse in the emergency bay. The doctor continued, his voice dropping an octave, heavy with a dark reluctance I did not fully understand yet. They answered the call immediately, but they refused to come to the hospital. The heart monitors hooked to my aching chest began to beep faster and faster as my heart rate spiked in sheer panic. What do you mean? I rasped, the soothing ice chips instantly turning to dry ash in my mouth. They said they were currently occupied with a critical engagement, he said, choosing his words with deliberate, agonizing care, as if he was trying to soften a deadly blow. They instructed us to proceed with standard care, but they explicitly stated they would not be leaving their event tonight to see you. Refused to come, I choked out, the words tearing at my raw vocal cords. Did they not understand I almost died? The doctor's face hardened. He pulled a chair close to my bed, lowering his voice to a harsh, clinical whisper. They understood perfectly, Genevieve. In fact, their understanding of your situation was entirely financial. When my charge nurse contacted your mother, her immediate response was not to ask about your brain function or your oxygen levels. Her first directive was to legally withhold consent for any further expensive, high-tier medical interventions. I stared at him, my mind utterly unable to process the sequence of words. It felt as though another wave of anaphylaxis was hitting me, this time attacking my very soul instead of my throat. What? Your mother informed our billing department that your premium health insurance is tied directly to the family trust, the doctor explained, his tone laced with a heavy, bitter disgust. She claimed the trust is temporarily frozen for a mandatory audit related to tonight's charity event. She explicitly ordered us not to run up a massive bill. She said, and I quote, that we needed to make do with basic life support. My chest tightened, but the doctor was not finished delivering the nightmare. It gets worse, he said, leaning in closer, his professional demeanor cracking under the weight of his own anger. Your father got on the line next. He demanded that we immediately discharge you and arrange a covert, midnight transfer to a cheap, privately owned urgent care clinic way out in the deep suburbs. He was absolutely frantic about the press presence at their hotel. He yelled at my staff, stating that if a single reporter at the gala found out the golden daughter of the Harvey family was lying half dead in a downtown intensive care unit, it would completely ruin the optics of their perfect philanthropic image. I felt a cold, venomous shock spread through my veins, paralyzing me far worse than the medical restraints. They were locking my insurance. They wanted to hide me in the dark like a shameful secret. Because your insurance was actively blocked by the primary policyholder, and the specialized critical care you require right now is astronomically expensive, the doctor continued, his voice tight with frustration. The hospital administration got involved. Legally, we were backed into a devastating corner. We were exactly 20 minutes away from being forced to suspend your neuroprotective protocol due to liability laws. Without that continuous, high-level monitoring, you were at a massive, undeniable risk for delayed hypoxic brain swelling, a complication that could have left you in a permanent vegetative state. The doctor stood up, looking utterly exhausted and deeply ashamed of the system he worked in. You are not being transferred tonight. You are staying right here in the best room we have. Someone else made sure of that. He turned and walked out, leaving me drowning in a toxic, suffocating mix of betrayal and sheer confusion. I did not have long to process the wreckage of my family. Barely 5 minutes passed before the heavy wooden door swung open again. It was not a nurse returning to check my vitals. The man who walked in possessed an aura that instantly commanded the entire room. He was casually dressed in a dark, tailored sweater and simple slacks, a sharp contrast to the sterile, terrifying medical environment. But his eyes were what caught my attention. They were terrifyingly sharp, cold, and relentlessly calculating, taking in every single detail of my battered state in a mere fraction of a second. He stopped at the foot of my bed, offering no polite smile, no false sympathy, and absolutely no pity. "My name is Elias Thorne," he said, his voice a smooth, low baritone that easily cut through the rhythmic, annoying beeping of the life support machines. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but only a dry, pathetic rasp came out. He raised a single hand to stop me. "Save your voice, Genevieve. You are going to need it," Elias said, pulling the leather visitor chair close and sitting down with deliberate, quiet grace. "You are probably wondering why the hospital suddenly decided to ignore legal protocol and keep you in the VIP intensive care suite, despite your parents aggressively cutting off your money supply." I gave a tiny, agonizingly painful nod. "I was sitting in the main hospital lobby downstairs about an hour ago," Elias explained, leaning forward, his piercing gaze locking directly onto mine. "I happened to be sitting within earshot of the main reception desk. The night shift charge nurse was on the phone, and she was not trying to keep her voice down at all. She was absolutely furious. She was screaming into the receiver, fighting a brutal, losing battle against a man and a woman who were aggressively demanding she pull their daughter off premium brain monitors to save their public relations campaign." Elias paused, his expression hardening into pure, unadulterated contempt. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I have dealt with a lot of terrible, greedy people in my life," he continued quietly, his tone dangerous. "But a mother and father prioritizing a financial audit and a high society party over a child whose heart had just flatlined, that was an entirely new depth of cold-blooded cruelty. It disgusted me on a deeply visceral level." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, solid metal black credit card, tapping it gently against the plastic bed rail. "So," I walked right up to the furious nurse, Elias said, his eyes never wavering from mine. "I told her to hang up the phone on your father. I handed her this card, and I told the hospital billing department to run a $150,000 upfront deposit. It cleared instantly. That money covered your massive emergency resuscitation costs. It completely bypassed the administrative block your mother set up, and it guaranteed you would stay in this exact bed, receiving top-tier neurological protection until you are fully recovered." I stared at the dark metal card, my heavily medicated brain struggling to comprehend the sheer magnitude of what this complete stranger had just done. $150,000, dropped on a whim by a man I had never met in my entire life, simply because my own flesh and blood had deemed my existence too expensive and too inconvenient to save. "Why?" I finally managed to whisper, the single, desperate word feeling like I was swallowing broken glass. Elias Thorne leaned back in his leather chair, a very dark, dangerous smile slowly playing at the corners of his mouth. Elias Thorne did not look at me with the soft, pitying eyes of a good Samaritan. His gaze was strictly analytical, dissecting the situation with the cold precision of a surgeon. He crossed one leg over the other, resting his hands casually on his knee. He treated me not as a helpless victim tethered to life support machines, but as a person possessing agency and intelligence, that genuine respect, in a sterile room where my own family had just stripped me of all human worth, was incredibly startling. "I am not just a wealthy stranger with a bleeding heart," Elias began, his voice perfectly modulated to ensure absolute privacy within the four walls. "I am a federal forensic auditor. I hunt economic predators for the government. My specific division specializes in tracking down the kind of high society criminals who hide their relentless greed behind black-tie charity galas and tax-exempt foundations." I lay perfectly still, the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen flowing into my nose the only sound anchoring me to the room. "For the past 18 months, he continued, leaning slightly closer, My investigative team has been quietly dismantling the intricate financial labyrinth of the Harvey Family Trust. Your parents are not philanthropists, Genevieve. They are parasites. They have been systematically siphoning millions of dollars from their own charitable initiatives to artificially inflate the stock prices of their corporate ventures. The heart monitors chirped, registering a slight elevation in my pulse, but Elias did not pause to soothe me. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was purposefully tearing down the carefully constructed, lifelong illusion of my entire existence. When I recognized the name the charge nurse was shouting into the phone downstairs, I realized the universe had just handed me an unprecedented opportunity, Elias said, reaching slowly into the inner pocket of his dark coat. He withdrew a small, matte black rectangular device. It was not a standard mobile phone. It looked like high-grade, directional field recording equipment. In my line of work, we document absolutely everything. I was already monitoring the external communications entering and leaving the gala venue tonight. When the hospital called your mother, my system intercepted and recorded the audio feed on the reception desk's end. He placed the heavy metal device on the edge of my mattress. His eyes held mine, unflinching and devoid of mercy. "You need to hear this," he stated simply. "It will hurt, but it is the mandatory key to your freedom." He pressed a small button. A tiny green light flared to life. The audio quality was terrifyingly crisp. First, there was the ambient background noise of the hospital lobby, the frantic voice of the nurse demanding immediate consent for the crucial neuroprotective protocol. Then, cutting through the medical jargon like a rusted blade, came my mother's voice. It was not panicked. It was not tearful. It was laced with a chilling, aristocratic annoyance. "Just leave her there. Give her an intravenous drip or whatever." Eleanor Harvey's voice echoed clearly in the quiet, intensive care room. "We absolutely cannot leave the gala right now. Do you have any idea who is in this ballroom? If a headline drops tomorrow morning saying the Harvey girl was hospitalized because she ate cheap, contaminated garbage, our corporate optics will be ruined. The company stock will hit rock bottom before noon. Lock the insurance file and keep her completely out of sight until we figure out a media strategy." Click. The recording stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and entirely suffocating. A single tear escaped the corner of my right eye, tracing a hot, wet path down my cheek and soaking into the sterile white pillowcase. I did not cry because my throat felt like it was lined with shattered glass. I did not cry because I had clinically died on a freezing office floor just a few hours prior. I wept because the final, fragile illusion of parental love had just been violently ripped out of my chest. I was not a daughter to them. I was a business liability. My breathing, my heartbeat, my future. None of it mattered compared to a public relations spin and the fluctuating percentage points of a stock market index. I had valued their love my entire life, only to find out they valued my beating heart less than a fabricated press release. Elias watched the tear fall. He did not offer me a tissue. He did not offer hollow words of comfort. He simply waited, letting the brutal reality of the digital recording sink deep into my bones. "I paid your medical bill tonight because I refused to let innocent collateral damage die on my watch," Elias said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding register. "But tomorrow, the sun will rise. Your parents will realize you survived the night. They will scramble to control the narrative. I have the financial documents to ruin them, but I lack the inside access to secure the final, undeniable proof of their embezzlement before they destroy the evidence." He stood up, towering over the metal bed, a dark shadow against the harsh fluorescent lights. "I am offering you a choice, Genevieve," Elias stated, his words hanging in the air like a heavy iron vault. "You can close your eyes, accept their fabricated love, and go back to being the silent, obedient porcelain doll of the Harvey Empire. Or you can open your eyes, take my hand, and help me tear their entire fraudulent kingdom down to the ground. You have the access I need. I have the power to destroy them. What is it going to be?" The tears stopped. The burning physical agony in my chest was suddenly eclipsed by an entirely different kind of fire. It was cold, sharp, and brilliantly clear. The terrified girl who had dialed her parents 17 times was dead. She had died on the floor of Nexus Pulse Dynamics. The woman lying in the hospital bed was someone entirely new. I forced my bruised, heavy arms to move against the restraints. I reached up and roughly wiped the dampness from my face. I looked Elias Thorne straight in the eyes. My gaze shifted permanently from the shattered vulnerability of a discarded child to the lethal calculation of a survivor. "Give me the instructions," I rasped, the broken sound of my voice now carrying a dangerous, razor-sharp edge. "I am going to burn them." The morning sun broke harshly through the slatted hospital blinds, casting long, sterile shadows across the linoleum floor. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the heavy wooden door to my intensive care suite flew open. It was not a doctor coming to check my vital signs. It was a perfectly choreographed theatrical production. My mother, Eleanor, entered first. She looked absolutely immaculate. Not a single strand of her chemically straightened blonde hair was out of place. She was wearing a tailored designer dress and carrying a massive, incredibly expensive bouquet of long-stemmed white roses. They looked like the kind of flowers you would order for a high-profile funeral, not a hospital recovery room. Right behind her was my father, Richard, wearing a sharp charcoal suit that probably cost more than a luxury vehicle. But the truly sickening detail was the third person trailing behind them, a young man with a heavy professional digital camera slung around his neck. They had brought a personal photographer to my sickbed. My mother rushed to the side of my mattress, her face instantly contorting into a flawless mask of pure, rehearsed anguish. "Oh, my sweet, darling girl," she wailed loudly, throwing her arms around my bruised shoulders. She was incredibly careful not to let her heavy diamond rings snag on my intravenous tubes, making sure her face was perfectly angled toward the lens. The camera shutter immediately began to click rapidly, capturing her fabricated sorrow in high definition. My father joined the performance, placing a heavy patriarchal hand on my forehead, looking down with manufactured grief. "We were so absolutely terrified. Genevieve," he lied smoothly, his voice thick with fake emotion. "The hotel ballroom had absolutely zero cell phone reception last night. We did not get your voicemails until this morning. It was a total dead zone. We rushed over the very second we found out." Zero cell phone reception. In a 5-star luxury hotel in the absolute center of downtown Chicago. It was a lie so transparent, so fundamentally insulting to my intelligence, that a day ago I would have screamed at them. I would have ripped the tubes from my arms and demanded the truth. But the terrified daughter they knew was gone. I played my part flawlessly. Hidden safely beneath the thin, scratchy cotton of my hospital gown, taped securely just above my collarbone, was a high-grade, micro-audio transmitter Elias Thorne had provided 2 hours earlier. It was currently active, capturing every single disgusting word. I let my facial muscles relax into a perfect expression of weak, forgiving relief. I leaned slightly into my mother's fake, suffocating embrace. "I am just so glad you are here now," I whispered, keeping my voice deliberately raspy and pathetic. "Lean in a little closer, Mr. Harvey," the photographer directed. Stepping around the medical machinery to get a better angle of the monitors, looked down at her with a bit more distress. "Perfect. Hold that." My mother was already dictating the social media caption to her public relations assistant via text message on her smartphone, using her free hand behind my back. "A terrifying night, but family love conquers all," she muttered under her breath. "Thankful for the incredible medical staff who saved our greatest treasure." After exactly 10 minutes of relentless flashing lights and forced embraces, my father gave the photographer a curt, dismissive nod. The young man quickly packed up his digital gear and scurried out of the room, shutting the heavy wooden door firmly behind him. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The exact second the heavy metal latch clicked into place, my mother dropped my hand as if my skin was infected with a deadly disease. The fake, watery tears completely vanished from her eyes, instantly replaced by a hard, venomous glare. She reached into her expensive leather handbag, pulled out a small bottle of antibacterial gel, and vigorously rubbed it into her palms. Do you have any idea how close you came to completely ruining the most critical night of our fiscal year? My father hissed, entirely dropping the warm, paternal tone. He adopted the harsh, demanding cadence of a furious corporate executive. He began pacing the small floor space between my bed and the window, his face turning red with genuine anger. 17 voicemails. Genevieve. 17 completely hysterical, screaming voicemails on a phone that was sitting right on the table next to the regional director of the Federal Reserve Bank. You caused a massive, embarrassing scene. You are 27 years old. You should know how to read a damn salad ingredient list by now. My mother stepped forward, her expensive heels clicking aggressively against the floor. She reached back into her bag and pulled out a thick stack of stapled legal documents, slamming them down violently on the rolling tray table across my lap. "We have successfully contained the press leak," she stated coldly, uncapping a heavy gold fountain pen and thrusting it toward my chest. "The hospital administration has been forcefully reminded of their extreme confidentiality clauses, but we need you to sign this non-disclosure agreement immediately. It legally binds you from ever discussing the exact timeline of your medical emergency with any media outlet, blogger, or even your own personal friends. The official public narrative is that we were by your side the entire night. You will not contradict that under any circumstances." I looked down at the dense, intimidating legal jargon. A few hours ago, this piece of paper would have crushed my spirit entirely. Now, it was just another piece of dry kindling for the inferno I was about to start. I picked up the gold pen with a deliberately trembling hand, playing the role of the intimidated, broken daughter to absolute perfection. "I am so sorry, Mother," I whispered, looking up at her with wide, fearful eyes, forcing a single tear to spill over my lashes. "I will sign it right now. I just want to put this terrible accident behind us. Did the charity gala go well? At least, did you manage to secure the funding for the new children's hospital wing?" It was the perfect, calculated bait. My parents were raging narcissists. They could never resist an opportunity to brag about their own brilliance and superiority, especially when they thought they were speaking to an obedient, naive subordinate who posed absolutely zero threat to them. My father scoffed loudly, a smug, arrogant smile spreading across his face as he stopped his pacing. "Secure the funding, Genevieve, please. We completely liquidated the secondary donor pool. The entire Children's Hospital initiative was merely a front-facing public relations vehicle. We never intended to build a single brick of a new wing." I kept my hand hovering hesitantly over the signature line, keeping my head bowed. "But what about the millions of dollars the wealthy donors pledged last night? The government auditors are going to look for that money eventually." I infused my voice with a perfect blend of childish confusion and innocent awe. My mother let out a sharp, incredibly condescending laugh. "Let the stupid auditors look all they want," she sneered, leaning intimately over the bed, entirely unaware that the microtransmitter taped to my chest was picking up every single razor-sharp syllable of her confession. "While you were busy causing a pathetic medical drama downstairs, your father and I were executing a massive offshore transfer. By midnight, we successfully funneled over $12 million from the primary charity trust directly into our private corporate shell accounts in the Cayman Islands. We utilized a series of dummy corporations established under the Nexus Pulse umbrella to invoice the charity for non-existent operational costs. It is completely untraceable. We secured our early retirement, and the local media is still hailing us as the greatest saviors of Chicago." She tapped her manicured fingernail against the signature line on the document impatiently. "Now, stop asking idiotic questions about adult finances and sign the damn paper so we can leave this depressing room." I lowered my head submissively. I pressed the heavy gold pen to the thick paper, but I did not sign my legal name. I simply scribbled a meaningless, illegible loop on the bottom line. It did not matter. The document was worthless anyway. My father snatched the papers from the tray, placed them carefully into his leather briefcase, and checked his luxury watch with a sigh of profound annoyance. "We have a major press conference at noon," he announced sharply, heading for the exit. Do not contact us again unless you are being officially discharged." They walked out of the room without looking back once, leaving the extravagant bouquet of white roses sitting uselessly on the counter like a bad joke. The heavy door clicked shut. I sat in the silence, listening to my own steady heartbeat on the monitor. I waited exactly 60 seconds. The door to the adjoining private bathroom slowly opened. Elias Thorne stepped out into the harsh fluorescent light. He walked silently to the side of my bed. A slow, incredibly dangerous, satisfied smile broke across his usually stoic face. I reached inside the collar of my gown, peeled off the small strip of medical tape, and handed the tiny black microphone to the federal investigative auditor. The warm-up act was officially over. It was time for the main event. Exactly 1 month later, I found myself sitting in the front row of the grand ballroom at the Symphony Center. My body was still healing. My lungs still burned slightly if I breathed too deeply, and a faint, pale scar remained on my hand from the countless intravenous lines. But my mind had never been sharper. Tonight was the annual Philanthropist of the Year Awards Gala, a massive, highly publicized event broadcast live to thousands of viewers across the state. My parents were the guests of honor. They had forced me to attend, dressing me up in a stiff, uncomfortable silk evening gown and locking a heavy, suffocating diamond collar necklace around my throat. I was their ultimate prop, the miraculous survivor. The ballroom was a sea of glittering evening wear, popping camera flashes, and clinking crystal champagne flutes. Every major news network in the city had their cameras pointed directly at the main stage. My father, Richard, and my mother, Eleanor, stood behind the crystal podium, bathing in the warm, golden spotlight. They looked like absolute royalty. My mother leaned into the microphone, dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. "Philanthropy is not just about writing checks," Eleanor announced, her voice echoing with practiced melodic warmth through the massive speakers. "It is about the fundamental, unbreakable bond of humanity. It is about protecting the vulnerable. As many of you know, our family faced a terrifying medical crisis recently. We almost lost our beloved daughter, but standing by her hospital bed, gripping her hand through the darkest hours of the night, Richard and I realized that the love for a child is the truest foundation of everything we do. We dedicate this award and the new $12 million children's wing to the power of family." The entire ballroom erupted into thunderous, standing applause. The wealthy elites wiped away sympathetic tears. It was the absolute pinnacle of their lifelong charade. It was sickening, but I just sat there, my hands folded perfectly in my lap, waiting. Right as my father stepped forward to accept the heavy glass trophy, the golden spotlights illuminating the stage abruptly died. The massive, high-definition projection screen behind them, which had been displaying their corporate logo, violently flickered to a harsh, blinding static. The polite applause faltered, instantly replaced by a confused, echoing murmur across the dark room. Then, the static cleared. The screen did not show a promotional video. It showed the stark, grainy, black and white security footage from the Nexus Pulse Dynamics office building. There was no sound at first, just the haunting visual of my body violently collapsing onto the freezing stone floor, thrashing in the terrifying grip of anaphylactic shock. The crowd gasped in unison. Some women covered their mouths in horror. My parents froze on stage, the color entirely draining from their faces as they stared at the giant screen behind them. Then, the audio kicked in. It was not the audio from the security camera. It was the sound of the first desperate voicemail I had left them. "Mom, please, cannot breathe. EpiPen broke. Help me." My wet, ragged, dying gasps echoed through the state of the Art Concert Hall sound system. It was deafening. The footage on the screen looped my agonizing struggle, while all 17 of my unanswered, terrifying voicemails played back to back. The agonizing, wet choking sounds filled the room. The wealthy guests who had just been weeping with admiration were now staring at my parents in absolute, paralyzed revulsion. "Turn it off!" my father hissed frantically into the microphone, completely forgetting it was still live. Cut the power to the projection room right now. But the system was completely locked down. The audio of my dying struggle abruptly stopped, replaced by the incredibly crisp, clear recording Elias Thorne had captured in the hospital lobby. Just leave her there. Give her an intravenous drip or whatever. My mother's callous, aristocratic voice blasted out to the thousands of people in the room. We absolutely cannot leave the gala right now. Do you have any idea who is in this ballroom? Lock the insurance file and keep her completely out of sight until we figure out a media strategy. The ballroom went completely, deathly silent. The cameras from the news network swung away from the stage and zoomed in closely on my parents' terrified, pale faces. But the execution was not over. The audio seamlessly transitioned to the secret recording I had captured the morning after I woke up. Let the stupid auditors look all they want, my mother's voice sneered through the speakers. The sound so clear it felt like she was standing right next to every single person in the room. While you were busy causing a pathetic medical drama downstairs, your father and I were executing a massive offshore transfer. By midnight, we successfully funneled over $12 million from the primary charity trust directly into our private corporate shell accounts in the Cayman Islands. We utilized a series of dummy corporations established under the Nexus Pulse umbrella to invoice the charity for non-existent operational costs. It is completely untraceable. Pandemonium erupted. The silence shattered into 1,000 pieces of pure, unadulterated outrage. Journalists began shouting questions. Donors who had just given massive checks were screaming furiously at the stage. My father grabbed my mother by the arm, desperately trying to pull her toward the backstage exit, their perfect, untouchable masks entirely destroyed. They never made it to the curtain. The heavy double doors at the side of the stage burst open. Elias Thorne strode out into the blinding camera lights. He was not wearing his casual sweater today. He was flanked by 6 heavily armed federal agents, wearing dark jackets with the letters FBI emblazoned in bright yellow across their backs. Elias walked straight up the steps to the podium, his posture radiating absolute authority. He held up a thick stack of official legal warrants. Richard and Eleanor Harvey, Elias announced, his deep voice easily cutting through the absolute chaos of the ballroom. You are hereby placed under federal arrest for massive wire fraud, grand larceny, tax evasion, and the direct embezzlement of $12 million from a federally protected charitable trust. Turn around and place your hands behind your backs. My mother let out a shrill, undignified shriek as a female agent forcefully grabbed her arms, securing heavy metal handcuffs around her wrists. The expensive glass trophy slipped from my father's shaking hands, shattering into 100 sharp, useless pieces on the hardwood stage. The perfect family they had spent decades building had just burned to the ground in less than 5 minutes. I stood up slowly from my plush velvet chair in the front row. The cameras immediately flashed in my direction. Expecting to capture the devastated, heartbroken daughter, I gave them nothing of the sort. I reached up to my throat and unclasped the heavy, suffocating diamond necklace my mother had forced me to wear. I let the expensive jewels slip from my fingers. The necklace hit the carpeted floor with a dull, heavy thud. I turned my back on the stage, ignoring the pathetic, desperate sound of my mother screaming my name as the agents dragged her away. I walked straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, parting the sea of shocked, murmuring elites. I pushed through the heavy golden doors of the Symphony Center and stepped out into the cool, crisp Chicago night air. I took a massive, deep breath, filling my healed lungs with the absolute, intoxicating sweetness of true freedom. Elias Thorne was standing right by the curb, leaning casually against a dark government vehicle. He did not offer a grand speech. He did not ask if I was okay. He simply looked at me, a silent, profound understanding passing between us, and gave a firm, respectful nod. I smiled back, a genuine, powerful smile. I walked away into the city lights, finally understanding the greatest truth of my life. Family is not always the people who share your blood, the ones who will eagerly leave you dying on a freezing floor to protect their wealth. Sometimes, Family is the absolute stranger who hears you crying in the dark and decides to reach out their hand to pull you back into the light. Thank you so very much to all our wonderful listeners for staying with me until the very end of this journey. I would love to know where you are listening to this story from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you found my story today powerful and engaging, please consider helping our channel. We only ask for $1. You can support us by scanning the QR code right here on the screen, or by using the donation link provided in the description box and the pinned comment. Your incredible generosity allows us to pay our dedicated team, helping them provide for their families, and ensures we can keep creating and bringing these amazing stories directly to you. Thank you again, and take care.